What's your favorite wow? I didn't see that one coming from a relative friend. Story 1. When my uncle had a heart attack and both his wife and girlfriend turned up to see him. Turns out for 30 years he told the wife he was working away during the week but staying with girlfriend. And told the girlfriend he worked weekends, which is when he stayed with his wife and 2 kids. 30 years. Edit. Forgot to add. He divorced his wife and married the girlfriend. Edit 2. Okay, so lots of people questioning when Uncle actually worked. He had a Monday to Friday 9 to 5 job that paid quite well. He stayed at the girlfriend's during the week after work. At the weekend, he went home to his wife, who thought he'd been working away all week. His girlfriend thought he was working away on weekends. Story 2. My sister, much older and not living with us at the time, had a cat that had kittens. They were ready to go to new homes around the same time that my dad passed away. Me being 12 and sad really wanted to keep my favorite one, the runt of the litter. She let me have the kitten, but we both agreed to hide it from my mom as long as possible. My mom absolutely despised cats. So much so that when my sister was younger and would bring them home, she would conveniently leave the door open so they'd run away or straight up bring them to the shelter. She vehemently refused to ever allow a cat in her house, so I got away with hiding my kitty for about a week. I was a chronic after-school napper and was knocked out when she came to check in on me randomly. The kitten peeked out from under the bed and she literally screamed because she thought it was a rat at first, LOL. She was pissed. She went to her room with the kitten and probably called my sister to come take it home. Surprisingly, when I went to her room like an hour later, they were just cuddling and watching TV. She did let me keep it, I assume, because I was grieving at the time. But she really did enjoy that cat. Eventually, when I moved out and she moved houses, she took the cat with her. A few years after my kitty had passed away, she went out and got a new kitten all on her own accord. Like, literally without telling me. I went to visit and was like, "Whose cat is that?" And she just goes, "Oh, that's mine. His name is Squash." I never saw that coming. She still says she hates cats to this day, but she likes her cats. She's actually considering getting 2 more soon, so Squash has some friends. Story 3. My great-grandfather and his 2 brothers went to prison and not college for 4 years for robbing trains. They had sold the family dairy farm just a couple years before the Great Depression and started a general store. They were all late teens, early 20s, with multiple kids each already. But during the Depression, Kraft Cheese started sending super cheap fake cheese and other dairy products into the area, undercutting all the local dairies. My grandpa and his brothers realized that they still depended on the local dairy industry as customers, so they robbed the trains of all the Kraft cheese and threw it into fields to rot. The local law just couldn't seem to catch the bandits that were trying to save the town economy. A reporter from Chicago was on one of the trains and got a picture of their faces, and they all went to college for a few years. When I graduated college, my grandmother said I was the first in the family. I asked what about great-grandpa, and she said, "Oh no, he went to prison, not college." But no one else in the family ever knew either, LOL. When they got out, they were all voted in as town councilmen, literally had customers for life. My great-grandmother ran the store while they were in prison, and she went on to run it until she retired at 93 years old. Great-grandpa had passed away in his 60s. Edit to add, Mom says the reporter from Chicago probably worked for Kraft because that's where the parent company was from. And only one brother actually got his face caught on camera, but the other 2 confessed to get him a lighter sentence. And my great-grandmother was adamant that my great-great-uncle did not roll over on his brothers. The other brothers decided to broker a deal for a reduced sentence. Second edit, it was my great-grandfather and his 2 brother-in-laws, not brothers. They went to college in Texas. This happened in Louisiana. And they did it to support a general strike by the dairy farmers, not just because of prices. They started shipping in Kraft cheese and milk to break the strike, so they robbed the train of Kraft cheese and milk. Problem solved. Third edit, just to add a little flavor. One of the brothers, my great-grandma was the second to last of 14, who went to college, asked his nephew to look after his wife while he was gone, and the nephew sure did. He got his aunt, by marriage, pregnant while my great-great-uncle was in Texas. So while I appreciate the calls for a movie, there may be some details like this that the family does not want brought into the light, LOL. Story 4. My big sister tried to terminate me when I was an infant. She was 12 years older than me, and I never knew it until she passed away last year. Apparently, when I was born, she was insanely jealous about the attention I got and tried to stab me to death. When my mom told me after my sister passed away, I literally did not believe her. But when she showed me the medical records and the 2 small scars in my left armpit, where she had stabbed me with an ice pick, I believed her. She also had files when my sister was institutionalized. They did that back then. I believed her. But here is why this is something I never saw coming. As far as I remember back, my sister have always been my very best friend. She is the one I would contact first when I was in trouble or depressed, and she would always be there for me. If I got a million guesses, I would never have guessed this. Honestly, I'm now 53 years old, and I'm more confused about everything than I have ever been. Story 5. Just this past weekend, my parents, both 63 years old, were in town. They live about 5 hours away. They, my brother, and his girlfriend, who is basically another sibling at this point, all came over for brunch. After we ate, my parents sat us down and said they had some very important news they needed to tell us about my dad. They built it up a lot, saying this is a big deal for them and that they kept going back and forth about how to tell us and when would be the best time, but that they knew they had to tell us soon, because it's a major deal for my dad. I 100% thought they were about to tell us that a doctor had told my dad he had 6 months to live or something. Nope. My dad, who is retired, got an offer to go back to work full-time as a consultant for 1 year. That was the news. He's going back to work for a year. I see them maybe 5 times a year, mostly on holidays. This will not impact my relationship or experiences with my parents in the slightest, but they framed it as a huge piece of bad news they had to tell us. Story 6. Went over to my folks' place when they were in their 60s. Mom says, come see what I got. I'm thinking a nice summer top, some new shoes. Nope, a large, beautiful red accordion. My mom at that time was maybe 5'1", had never played a musical instrument, and as far as I know, had never mentioned the word accordion to anyone. But it was the music of her youth, and she took lessons for years and slowly learned to play it. So I'd go over, she'd be on the top floor struggling away. Dad'd be in the basement trying to relearn the piano on a rather battered old and out-of-tune upright, and the cat would be hiding under the couch. Story 7. I spent the last 6 months of my grandmother's life as her hospice caretaker. I loved my grandmother very much, and it was heartbreaking, brutal work. My family is dysfunctional, but I never really believed they were so heartless until that time. Everything was so hard because of them. I felt like an insane person in an asylum. Screaming, arguing, fighting. My cousin's wife stole my grandmother's morphine. One of my aunts helped a lot and was her actual health proxy, so she made all the decisions and I had no say. Because she had me to do the work, they decided to keep her home. It was an evil thing. I had no healthcare training and I was alone a lot. Grandma was completely gone with a brain tumor and it was well into catheters and diapers, hand feeding, restraining, etc. She absolutely should have been safe in a care facility, but aunts and mom had me to do it, so they were selfish about it. No one else would help for more than an hour or two, or showed up to visit but left when anything needed to be done. Heartbreaking, difficult, physical and body fluid work, while insane people screamed at me until my beautiful grandmother passed away. I assumed I'd at least be thanked. Turns out my grandmother thoroughly believed estate wasn't worth much, and left everything to 2 of her 4 daughters. One of which spent so much time helping me with Grandma. The house was totally paid off and sold for $250K plus. I assumed they'd at least split it up. Nope, they kept it all. I got a pair of fake diamond earrings and a display cabinet. I also grabbed her recipe book. She loved to cook and loved when I cooked for her. That was it. And later they complained because they wanted the recipes, and I shouldn't have them for whatever reason. I was struggling to pay rent because I didn't work during that time. I barely had enough money for food. I was deeply burned out and used up and wrecked from it. I had to miss the funeral because I had to start a new job that day and couldn't afford to lose it or lose even 1 day's pay. My aunt uses the money to put decorative siding on her house. Within months, everyone went back to ignoring me and most completely forgot that I ever helped at all. It was all swept away like it never happened. It turns out that that's your family, you have to help is one-sided. I went no contact with my entire family in 2020. It took 5 years, but that was what made me really see how awful they were. Story 8. I should have seen it coming, but I didn't. My sister gambled away around $500,000 of our mom's, actually our granddad's money, leaving practically nothing. This is still very fresh. My mom refused to press charges and instead doubled down and went back to live with her and gave her more money. My other sister and I have been alienated because of this. My mom then passed away on April 22nd. I am not speaking to my sister, who is listed as the executor of the will. I'm sure that is the end of any inheritance I would have gotten, and I hope she has fun dealing with the legal and tax ramifications of what she did. Story 9. I've posted about this on a couple of other threads today, but I am the one who threw a curveball to my now boyfriend. We know each other through work and through a few mutual friends. One of those mutual friends is my roommate, who's a boy woman. Dude and I would have regular lunch together at work, and all that time he thought that I was my roommate's girlfriend since we lived together. That changed one night last December when all of us went out to a social event after work, and roommate's actual girlfriend showed up. That's how he learned I was straight. By the next week, we were officially dating. Story 10. Or maybe had at this point IDK, an uncle that was relatively respected by people that knew him. Active in church, teacher, outgoing with a sense of humor. Spent my entire childhood slowly redoing his house, living in the same one the whole time. Met a homeless person at a church fundraiser, food drive, community event, or whatever. Let's then stay in the garage because it was dead winter in a Midwest state. Fast forward 5 years from that decision. Dude's methed out of his mind, sprinkling flour outside, trying to catch footprints and punching holes in his walls because people are living in there. 25-plus years of hard work done with his own hands, undone by those same hands. Cops know him by name, but he's never done anything arrest-worthy, I guess. Lost his family. Will never see his grandkids. I'm just assuming death here before he'd ever get clean. Drove one of his sons to multiple failed suicide attempts and hospital stays. Wildest thing I think we've heard from him was he got wild babbling about the cartels, and we just wrote it off as crazy person talk fueled by a meth-addled brain. But sure enough, a news story a week and a half later was about arrest made in connection with a Mexican cartel member. Quite an interesting way to spend your 60s, I guess. Story 11. We were planning a chill barbecue at his place. Just the usual burgers and hot dogs vibe. But when we got there, the backyard was all decked out with twinkling lights, and there was this giant banner that said, "Congratulations." Turns out my cousin had secretly planned a surprise engagement party for his girlfriend. None of us had a clue. It was a total wow, I didn't see that one coming moment. He had organized everything himself, from the decorations to inviting all our family and friends. The best part was seeing the look on his girlfriend's face when he got down on one knee. It was priceless. I think that was the most unexpected and heartwarming surprise I've ever experienced from a relative. Story 12. After my daughter was born, my spouse, her dad, and I went to stay with his mom for a while to get some help and save up to move to Oregon where we are now. Turns out she's abusive and severely neglectful. She dumped out potentially a gallon of ball milk that I had pumped during the formula shortage. She told me I could use her fridge, then she would throw away my food and move it around just to mess with me. She would text him long messages, because he avoided talking to her. That was the only way she could communicate with him, about how I was manipulating him and her furniture that I moved around so it would be safe for the newborn baby she was housing. She would sit on the other side of our walls and listen to our conversations, listen to me bathing my daughter, then would make weird comments about what she heard. Shoved my daughter's pacifier in and out of her mouth when she would cry until I took them all away from her. Then she refused pacifiers at 4 months old. I had to put wallpaper up on our living room door after we moved in because she would just stare at us or walk into our space uninvited, then glare at me and trash talk me through talking to my baby. Well, Mommy just wants you all to herself, doesn't she? I saw her pinching my daughter and repeating, "Mommy, Mommy, Mommy," twice. She would slap her on the back really hard when she cried, and I had to constantly take her away until I could move in with my friend overseas. My spouse and I still haven't recovered. I don't know if he ever will. It broke us. Story 13. My uncle has always been a bigot and not too fond of women. He's gotten much worse to my older sister now that her and her wife are expecting. It blew up last Easter when he started preaching about people choosing who they want rather than who they should. He practically said that if a man wasn't supposed to be with a woman, every man would choose another man. There's no way any man in his right mind would choose to be with a woman if he didn't have to. After some pointed staring, he clammed up and refused to elaborate. Suddenly, the 4 failed marriages and no children made more sense, though. Edit spelling. Story 14. My sister did Ancestry and found out my dad has a biological sister no one ever knew about, including him. My sister found her on Instagram or Facebook and said she looked pretty much exactly like her, and I was shocked when I saw it. She told Dad, who asked our grandma about it, and she freaked out, so he dropped it. A little while after, my sister talked to our uncle, and he said he also found that out a little while before, but that he found out that it was better to let that topic go when it comes to grandma. because she does asterisk not asterisk handle it well. If that's not enough for people to believe, my sister initiated a talk with our secret aunt, and the latter confirmed that our biological grandfather was her dad, and that Grandma was her mom, and that she was born in our home state. However, when my sister asked a couple more questions, she completely dipped out and blocked my sister and everything. Then when my sister expressed doubt to Ancestry, they said there was no chance this person was not my dad's sister because the gene report featured such a strong match. We figure Grandma probably had an unexpected pregnancy and it was taboo, or she just wasn't ready for a kid yet, enough to essentially give her up for adoption and act like nothing ever happened. So I figure, given the time period, that Auntie was probably born out of wedlock. Story 15. Into our extended family's Sunday brunch with kids running around, including her own, my sister introduced her boyfriend of the past 6 months. After brunch, we took our coffees to the living room, and said sister asked if the kids could go downstairs to play for a bit because she wanted to talk to us about something. My dad had recently passed, so we thought it had something to do with that, and the kids went off. Sister's BF starts to tell us a story about something personal that happened to him. Then lets my sister finish up telling us that BF is a pedophile, but she's been watching for signs of it with her kids, so it's all good. I stood up, hugged my sister, and told her I loved her, then collected my kids and left. I've never spoken to her since. Story 16. When I was in high school, there was a guy, Mike, in nearly all of my classes. He was nice enough, but very, very dorky. He was tall and thin, average-looking, but really a doofus. He had a huge crush on me through high school and even asked me out a couple of times. I told him no, nicely, but we remained friendly because we had a mutual friend. Once he knew I really and truly wasn't interested, Mike chased after one girl or another and was always crushing on some girl. Finally, senior year, Mike did date this girl for a bit, but things fizzled once they both went off to college. Well, I caught up with Mike about 20 years after graduation. After college, he moved to the opposite coast, and no one heard from him for a while. He ended up moving back home due to some family issues, and when we met up, I was greeted with a very, very openly homosexual man. He looked fantastic. He was in amazing shape, well-groomed and well-dressed. Honestly, I barely even recognized him. He looked like a different person. He'd been in a committed relationship with another man for over a decade, was super happy, and living his best life. Couldn't be happier for him, but man, you could have knocked me over with a feather. Story 17. My daughter was friends with a girl all throughout elementary school, middle school, and high school. We knew her parents well and had been to their house many times for birthday parties. The girl's father was very nice and just the kind of guy who was always upbeat. A few months ago, he was driving in the car with his wife and 2 of their 5 children. They got in an argument and he shot her in the car 7 times, terminated her in the car with their 3-month-old and 13-month-old in the back seat. Now these 5 children have no mother and pretty much no father. Those 2 babies will never know their incredible mother. He seemed like such a nice guy. Everyone in the community knew and liked him. Story 18. When my daughter's mother and I first split up, my mom and stepdad were both giving me advice. On the lines of your generation always wants to give up and don't stick together through tough times like our generation. Y'all don't believe in marriage, etc. He kept telling me to go get my girl back and just stick through the struggle we were both having. Meanwhile, he's telling her to never take me back and to put me on child support. Telling her lies about me. All because he never thought I was worthy of anything. He was mad that I could raise my child without having to beat her when she messed up. I want to say this as obvious as it may seem. Kids are born into this world not knowing a single thing. And it's our job I teach them, so when my child messes up, it was me that failed to teach her the right way. So I speak to her and explain and show her how to do it the right way. She's only 8 now, and I'm so proud of who she is becoming. Whooping her peach wouldn't have brought out the greatness in her. Edit. Sometimes we as parents think that simply telling our kids do this and don't do that is enough. We expect them to get it the first time. When we ourselves have made many mistakes, and will continue making mistakes as long as we are learning new things. Story 19. My dad and grandmother, both fully retired, were talking a road trip to visit some family. It's about 20 hours. I'm almost halfway, so they were staying here a night. The plan was to drive up the day after my birthday, stay the night, and leave early the next day. I asked my dad if they wanted to come up a day or 2 early and spend my birthday with me. I didn't even think there would be any hesitation since neither of them had cow else going on. He said he'd talk to my grandmother and get back to me. Okay, totally normal thing to say. Then he calls back the next day and literally said, "We're not interested." And that was that. I am still about a month later totally mind-blown. Story 20. When I was 6, my family moved in 2 houses down from a kid a couple years older than me that I became very good friends with. We would hang out almost every day for a decade or so. Go hunting, go on trips together and stuff. Our families were very close as well. He was kind of an awkward guy, not bad looking, but never had luck with the ladies. One day he meets a girl online and moves across the country to live with her, which I thought was odd, but attributed it to his lack of experience with women. About a year later, a headline pops up on Facebook with a mugshot of him. He got charged with possession of CP and distribution of pics of his girlfriend's 5-year-old daughter and sentenced to life without parole. Mother was sharing that cow in social media back channels. Never saw it coming. This guy would make comments about shooting pedos on sight and all that. Now, most of my memories from the ages of 10, 21 are tainted with the reality of what that monster would become. At least he's where he needs to be now. Story 21. My eldest maternal aunt and uncle always gave me a vibe, but I was young. I knew they seemed strict and kind of cold. Aunt passed away of lung cancer and didn't tell anyone until about 10 days before she passed. Uncle passed several years later. At Uncle's funeral, my mom pulled me aside. She had hung out with my 4 cousins, Uncle's children, the night before, and they all told stories of horrid abuse. We're talking repeated broken bones that were not allowed to be treated at the hospital. Also found out that my aunt was knocked up at age 17 with my eldest cousin. She never told anyone who the father was, though she regularly had sums of money coming to her, and we're pretty sure it was a high-profile person in our area. This has caused a lot of problems for eldest cousin, who could really benefit from knowing who it was. From a health standpoint, they were absolute garbage people, and I had no idea. Story 22. My mom admitted to me that she knew my older brother was assaulting me my entire childhood, and she just ignored it because she resented me. I had spent my whole life thinking, if only I had been brave enough to tell her what happened, she would have stopped it because even she wouldn't let that happen. She herself was very abusive to me. Whipped me with straightened-out metal clothes hangers till I bled, repeatedly starved me for a week at a time, then made me eat a bar of hand soap to prove I was hungry, and if I puked, the week started over again, and held my hand to a red-hot stove element as punishment to name a few of the greatest hits, which is why I said even she. But turns out she knew the whole time and did nothing because she hated me. That honestly broke me when I heard it a couple weeks ago. 'Cause that means she knew he was assaulting me so violently that he ruptured my colon that needed surgery to repair. And she didn't just believe the lie my brother came up with as a cover story. I've been asking myself how she could be so cruel to know I was going through that multiple times a week and still do nothing. It's heartbreaking and makes me wonder why I wasn't worth protecting to her. Story 23. When I was 14, I was in the middle of a family meeting. Me, my mom, my dad, my brother, and we were sitting around the kitchen table talking about something to do with my brother and I. My dad said something like, "I just want to do whatever's best for you. I never got to the first time." Confused, I thought he meant like my mom, and him had a miscarriage before my brother or I. But I knew that had never happened, so I questioned him. Turns out I have a half-brother. Full out. It was safe to say I was shocked he's about 34 now. My dad had him in his early 20s, but my half-brother's mom took him out of my dad's life when he was 2, and to top it all off, I was the only one who didn't know. Story 24. Oh, this is fun. My grandmother, Dad's mom, hired people to ruin my parents' marriage. Of course, nobody knew what she did in the beginning. My mom would receive death threats from random people, and my grandma kept setting up situations to tempt my mother to cheat on my dad to rock their worlds. Thankfully, she didn't. During all that, my dad got random tips telling him my mom was cheating on him. It got so bad that while I was in school, these people would talk to me randomly and tell me to inform my mom to be careful. The police got involved and there was a major investigation. Those people who were hired were all jailed, and the police gotten to know that the mastermind of it all is my grandmother. My mom didn't press any charges to my dad's mother, though. My parents just decided to move to another country. That was 24 years ago. My dad's family is still as cow as they could be, but at least we're far from them. Story 25. Here's a curveball one for you. I live in the U.S. I took a position in South Africa for a few months, which ended up being a little over 2 years. A rather close friend of mine is a black American, though he is originally from the UK, and his parents are from Ghana. Before I leave for South Africa, he says to me, "While you're there, don't get the jungle fever." Confused, as I had never heard of this disease, I ask him what it is. He then proceeds to tell me about how some white dudes go to Africa and end up only liking black girls after. He then proceeds to tell me how to avoid the jungle fever because the black girls there were no good, and how much better it was to date white girls. It was so bizarre to hear this somewhat racist discussion unfold in front of me. Even more so was that he basically was disparaging his own race. No joke, he even was like, "Dude, trust me." I got embarrassed when I went to Africa once, as the whole time I was thinking how all these Africans weren't my people at all. So yeah, I had a black dude, a friend, go on a racist rant against black Africans to me before I traveled there. It really caught me off guard. Story 26. My mom had custody of my niece all her life. Well, her and my dad. Dad passed away in 2011. I was there for her from the day she was born. I babysat her, helped raise her alongside my kids, went to all the important things in her life. My mom passed away in 2022. My husband and I offered our home to my niece, who was 15 at this time. Had her own room, bought her a new cell phone. Put $4,000 towards my mom's car to buy it for her. Took her to all appointments, bought her clothes and gifts, all her necessities, vacations, etc. She lived with us until she turned 17. She decided she wanted to live with her mom, my sister, full-time and do cyber school. I was fine with it, as long as my sister made she sure was doing her work. I made plans to go out to lunch with them. My sister wanted her boyfriend to come, and I said, "How about another time?" They both blew up on me. My niece told me I'm self-centered and an awful person who only cares about myself. I no longer speak to either of them. I found out my sister is also letting my niece breathe candy, vape, and drink. Story 27. My sweetest, shyest online friend of many years called me from state prison one day to tell me they were in for 5 years and banned from the internet for another 5 after that. He would not tell me what he did, but I Googled his charges online using the inmate number he gave me for snail mailing him, and though I didn't understand all the words, I saw the word minor and other things that implied what he had done, and with him also being banned from the internet, I think I figured some of it out. So the next time he called, I pressed him right away. "Did you assault someone?" And he laughed, like giggled, and said, "Well, that's one of the charges." I felt so sick I ended up changing my phone number. He sent some snail mails, but I threw them away without opening. My friend said I should read them, and maybe he would have told me what he did, but I know enough, honestly. And even if he did confess in a letter, I know it would be surrounded by stupid justifications or something I would hate to read. Goodbye. Good riddance. Never saw it coming from this guy at all, though. You never can tell, I guess. Story 28. My husband didn't see this coming. We had just moved into a new house, and my cat ran off as soon as we got here. My husband had to leave on a business trip, and I went to animal control to find the cat. No cat, but I came home with a dog who I was asked to walk to see how she does with new people. She ignored me the whole time, but also refused to leave my side. So I brought her home. My kids were delighted, but we have her for a few days, and I forgot to tell my husband about her. The kids were busy in a new school, and it was a collective non-issue. The move had been traumatic, and life had been up in the air for a few months. We really forgot, and when we spoke, he was more worried about the utilities being on and the new neighbors, etc. My husband got home in the middle of the night, and I got a phone call from the entryway. "There is a dog staring at me, and I am in a corner. Come get me right now." I went downstairs, and he was standing by the door with his luggage and laptop. He hadn't even taken off his coat. Our new dog was thumping her tail, patiently staring at him. Whenever he moved, she bared her teeth. No barking, no drama. We suspected that if he made any progressive motion, she would neatly dispatch him, and I would need to deal with his body. I went to my husband and kissed him, and our dog, a chow mix, was all happiness. My husband picked her up and carried her upstairs. She was an animated teddy bear, playful and silly. She was the best dog we ever had. My husband totally understood how we forgot to tell him, partly because she was so stealthy and quiet. It was easy to forget she was there. Unless she felt talkative, then her inner husky came out. Story 29. My pops is dead and gone now, so I can tell this true story with no worries. My dad grew up poor in Oklahoma, in a loving family, until his mom cheated on his dad with an out-of-town worker. They eventually moved to Vegas when my dad was 18 and split up not long after. My grandfather remarried, and apparently this woman was bat-cow crazy and money-hungry. She murdered my dad's father, whom he loved very deeply, probably for his life insurance is what I assumed. When I asked if she was ever found guilty, he said no. They didn't have enough evidence. He told me this story every now and then growing up, but before he passed away, he added another detail. My dad was a tender father. I don't remember him spanking me growing up. He was like my lighthouse in the night of the awful dark that was my childhood. But that man was also a bad MFer LOL. He served in Vietnam, had been shot and blown up, was a private bodyguard for big whales that would come into casinos on his off days. I am pretty confident at one point he was head of security for some mafia-type fella, lots of pictures and gifs that suggest this, and was chief of security for a big-name casino later on. He was recounting the story again. I am an adult now, and he is on death's door. And at this time I asked if he had ever ran into her again over the years while living in Vegas. His reply was along the lines of, "Oh no, I took care of that a long time ago." When I asked him what he meant, he said the desert is vast and lonely. Easy to get lost if no one is missing you anyway, especially as someone helped you get that way. Cue surprise Pikachu face lol, he stood trial too. Never could pinpoint him on it, never could convict him. Story 30. Back during the BLM protests, I had a super conservative MAGA relative reach out to me when he heard I was going to be attending a few. This man is almost 90 and has spent the last almost 60-plus years as a devotee Jehovah Witness, knocking on doors and everything. He reached out to give me tips on how to avoid arrest, how to avoid getting stuck in crowds when the police are trying to block protesters in, if I knew how to do field medical assistance in order to avoid going to a hospital and getting caught that way, etc. He asked if I knew how to make homemade cocktails and whatnot. Come to find out, he was a lot more involved with the communist revolution in the old country than anyone has ever mentioned. Story 31. My grandpa passed away a few years back. He was very nice, albeit a hardened, very conservative religious rancher. After he passed away, it was revealed that all of his money, assets, a lot, was left to his 4 sons, and he cut out his daughters, my mom and aunt, purely because he felt it was their husband's job to take care of them. Everyone was kind of like WTF, and it kind of soured our memory of him, especially because it was my mom and aunt that managed his hospice end-of-life care. So anyway, my mom is venting to me about it, and she revealed to me that my great-grandfather did the same thing to his kids, citing the same sexist reason. My grandpa has 2 sisters, and after great-grandpa's death, they went to my grandpa and asked him to split the estate with them. He told them no and kept everything for himself. We're talking hundreds of acres of land and farming assets. Money, too. This was apparently somewhat public knowledge, and my mom, aunt, and uncles, who all knew about the drama, were actually surprised when he did it again, Lmao. All of the assets are currently in a trust for my grandma, but when she passes, it will all go to my uncles. My uncles claim they will make it right with my mom and aunt, but I don't know, man. Money makes people weird, so I told my mom not to get her hopes up. She especially shouldn't when her adult son that lives with her is running around threatening to just take cow. But that's a story for another Reddit comment. Story 32. They invited me to go for an off-roading trip in the desert. One night the guys invited me to go for a night ride. I took a back seat in the Can-Am. We stopped to have a couple beers on top of a hill in an isolated area. I walked away to take a leak in the bushes, and as I'm walking back, I notice all the guys gathered around my seat talking in hushed but frantic voices. Only words I can clearly make out are, "He's coming back." Just then, they all scatter and run for their respective side-by-side seats, shouting nonsense at each other like, "Let's go," and "Let's go find a hill to climb." The AI driving the one I'm riding in yells, "Let's go, dude," at me. I hurry over and jump in. Right away, he turns around to look me in the eye and asks me, "Are you ready?" in a comically evil tone that instantly piques my suspicion. "Sure, man," I say, "just let me," as I'm turning around to situate my 5-point harness. I didn't finish the sentence because I realized in an instant they had tampered with the harness. They had buckled it all up and tightened it up so much I couldn't release the latch. He had already fired up the engine, and I swear I instantly remembered from 2 years prior this group of AHS talking about having to attend a friend's funeral one weekend after he had passed away in a rollover accident on the golf course with them. Without a word, I jumped through the window of the Can-Am like a effing cat. Didn't bump an elbow or anything. I yelled at them, "Fudge you! Camp's only a couple miles from here in that direction, and I'm a distance runner. I don't deserve to pass away. I can walk back there from here no problem." Their demeanor instantly did a 180. "No, no, no. That's not what's happening." He jumps out and fixes my harness. I told him, "Don't move until I tell you I'm ready." He complied. I made sure I was safe. I stupid at them the rest of that ride and kept my knife folded out in my pullover sweater pocket the rest of the night. I was sitting right behind the AH driver. I was honestly ready to stab him in the neck if any of them did anything stupid or hostile again. I made it back to camp safe. Eventually made it home safe. told my closest confidants my story, and eventually went no contact with those poes. I ever find out anyone gets maimed or terminated in a rollover accident with them, I will come forward real quick to bury them in their own cow. Story 33. When I was in high school, I was really good friends with this girl, and everyone was convinced we were secretly dating. One night I was chatting with her on AOL Instant Messenger and decided to bite the bullet. I told her I had something to tell her and proceeded to come out to her as boy. I told her I understood if she hated me and never wanted to talk to me again. She replied with, "Well, that would be fairly hypocritical of me." I was absolutely floored. I had no idea she was a sapphic. She and her wife are now happily married and living on a farm with their foster children. I also took my best friend of 20 years to Las Vegas for the first time, which is when I found out that she had a very serious gambling addiction, to the point where she drained all of her and her fiancé's accounts, and they had to get a second mortgage on the house. She finally came clean to everyone so we could help support her and hold her accountable, and is doing well now, luckily. Story 34. I was raised in California, but my family is from Georgia. We went to visit one summer. My mother told me that we had a lot of poor relations there. We were sitting on my grandparents' porch one afternoon when an old beat-up Ford Aerostar van pulled up. It looked like it had been through hell. Mismatched wheels and body panels, filthy, broken window, etc. Two rough-looking older redneck types got out wearing nothing but overalls and work boots. I leaned over and whispered to my mom, "Those must be the poor relations you mentioned." She looked at me and howled with laughter. Then she got up to hug her cousins. After, she told her cousin Ricky to show me his wallet. He pulled a thick, ancient leather wallet out of his pocket. It had a thick rubber band holding it closed. It was packed full of hundreds. The story was that he and his brother dropped out of high school in the 60s and got jobs at the local cotton mill. They saved and bought a condemned house near the mill. They remodeled it and then used the earnings to buy another, then another, etc. 40 years later, they owned an extremely lucrative construction company that catered to the wealthy. They had lots of land on Lake Lanier and built many homes there. Their own home was huge, with double marble staircases and an elevator with a glass garage large enough to park 10 vehicles. They had 2 or 3 of the earliest, rarest Mustang convertibles. Neither had ever married. They just worked. Story 35. I was planning on moving out to live with my grandma and the rest of the family several states away. Then she, out of the middle of nowhere, dropped the bombshell that her boyfriend lays hands on her. So yeah, I'm a mix of hurt that he'd do that to her, angry at him for being an abusive POS, and disoriented having my entire life path fall apart in front of me in a matter of minutes. I've also had to immediately cut out Facebook friends after they've either posted horrific cow on their feeds or just texted me saying cow like, "Actually, I abuse animals because it's legal where I'm from. No offense." Yes, he actually said no offense in that flipping text. I've truly seen way too much, and I'm disgusted by the awful people I'm constantly surrounded by. Story 36. This one goes the other way compared to most of this thread. My parents have close friends. I used to babysit their son when we were much younger, but I'm only 4 or 5 years older than him. He was never the best student or very ambitious, and was a stoner starting fairly early in high school. We lost touch for a decade when he went to college, and I started my career and then a family. I reconnected with him a few years ago, and wow. He's still a daily smoker, among other things, but he finished college, went to med school, got a fellowship at the Mayo Clinic. He is now one of the best ICU specialists in the country, works and teaches at a major teaching hospital, and is an absolute rock star in his field. Story 37. After 10 years with my husband, he told me he was boy. I honestly really did not know. There had been a handful of marital issues, but nothing that seemed out of the norm for married couples our age. It was otherwise close and loving marriage. I deflowered him and was the only person he had ever been with, and he emphatically assured me that that is how he wanted his life. Until one day, it just wasn't anymore. And once he came out, the floodgates opened. His entire personality changed, rapidly and severely. The man I married was conservative and deeply Christian. He was extremely intelligent and kind with a great sense of humor. My own Captain America. Until he developed a candy addiction and would frequent bathhouses, often being gone without contact for days at a time. His behavior got more reckless and more dangerous. He would bring strangers home, close relationship in our marital bed. Often I was already home. They would pass by me and not say anything except laugh. I do not miss the man I divorced, but I deeply miss the man that I married. He was a great guy, and we were very much in love, and no one saw this coming. Not his family, not his friends, not his associates. It was like Invasion of the Alien Body Snatchers or something. I've to this day never known another person to change their personality so completely and so rapidly. And because the divorce was the last time we ever saw each other, I've processed this more like the grief of losing someone through death than a breakup. And for context, I will add that I consider myself a very liberal, non-religious person, and an ally as I have a significant number of boy, trans, otherwise queer friends I support. When my husband came out, my first reaction was relief and joy that he can be who he is meant to be. Not a single one of my boy trans friends saw this coming from him either. Story 38. My grandfather is the kind of man who managed to become rich but started with humble origins. I grew up with stories about how he started with literally nothing and slowly growing up, the kind of, with effort you can achieve everything. Like how he would ride his bicycle from sun to sundown to buy cigarettes in the city and sell them on his village. I didn't notice the clues as a kid, but looking back it didn't make sense all the wealth coming from a humble bike repair shop in such small place. That was until recent years. With age he lost all filters and started to tell me all the cow he did, the wild stories about my father, and how he would bribe the cops in the area to look the other way. Story 39. My uncle had electroshock therapy in the 50s and 60s after he witnessed his best friend be murdered right in front of him. Doctors tried everything to fix him before electroshock, but anyway, he was never the same. He ended up with the mentality of a young teen boy with OCD and developed savant syndrome when it came to sporting event date and scores. He spent a lot of his next 50 yesers worrying the guy who terminated his friend was going to come back and finish him off. Before he passed away, he revealed that the afternoon where he said he and his friend were robbed at gunpoint and his friend terminated, well, that was a lie. It was actually my uncle and his friend trying to rob the other guys, and my uncle's friend passed away in the process. Story 40. My very large family was dispersed into a 50-mile or so circle between my mom, dad, 12 siblings. Huge age range, and many of them had large families. A second cousin was getting married, and her mom called my mom, they were very close in age, and asked if my older sister could be a bridesmaid at her daughter's wedding. My mom said sure, and the dress shop was named where she should go get her bridesmaid's dress. Sister couldn't make rehearsal due to work schedule, but it wasn't complicated. Big day comes, and my sister is first bridesmaid down the aisle. We were seated in the back of the very crowded church and couldn't see anything in front, but my sister has started down the aisle and is holding up her bouquet, giving me the side eye and nodding to the front of the church. I lean out into the aisle, and the soon-to-be married groom is the guy my sister is dating, and has been dating for almost 3 months. I tell my mom, and she puts finger to lips for shh, shut up. We were all instructed as soon as we got out of the church to not breathe a word. So my cousin married my sister's boyfriend. Never saw that coming. Story 41. My uncles. They were both married to my mom's sisters. The first one turned into a candy dealer of some sort. My aunt claims she didn't know what he was up to, which no one in my family believes. My father has law enforcement connections and repeatedly warned her and even banned him from our house. His body was found in a dumpster in Venezuela. The other one turned out to be an alcoholic and candy user with a gambling addiction. My super successful aunt, CFO of a large company, managed to keep it hidden until he stole $30K from his job. A few years later, he crashed his car and the police found crack in a pipe. He passed away shortly thereafter of liver cirrhosis and kidney failure. These men helped raise me, they loved me and took care of me. Brushed my hair, took me to school and told me to study hard so I could do and be anything I wanted to. I never saw their ugly side. Story 42. In college, I studied abroad for a year in West Africa. Rather than emailing each and every friend and family member periodically to let them know how I was doing, I opted to keep a blog. My experience there was filled with lots of highs and lows. For the most part, it was a really safe, welcoming environment. I learned a lot, made some great friendships, and got to see and do so many cool things. But the sexism, who, boy? Listen, things are far from perfect here, but there it was, just blatant and in your face, and I blogged about my frustrations with it. My aunt was the most stereotypical librarian you could ever imagine. Quiet, soft-spoken, introverted. Very smart, but always seemed to play by the rules. She was the middle sister, and I had heard rumors of her rebellious side when she was growing up, but I'd never witnessed anything like that myself. While I was abroad, she sends me an email out of the blue talking about what I'm doing, how proud she is of me, etc. She then starts commiserating about all the sexism and says, and I quote, If we can't expect men to control their bananas, how can we expect them to run a country? Oh no, Aunt Kathy. Never saw that one coming. It's funny, too, because when Trump was elected, she turned ultra-left-wing and eventually deleted her social media for fear she'd say something to get herself arrested. So I guess that rebellious streak was there all along and just hidden while my cousin was growing up. Story 43. When my best friend came to my cottage with his new girlfriend of 2 months, and we all were meeting her for the first time. She was weird, their dynamic was weird, and nothing made sense. But as a good friend, I didn't judge and tried to make them as comfortable as possible. And then I'm out on the dock smoking a blunt, having some drinks and fishing, and my friend comes up to me and says his new girlfriend basically wants to fudge me and my best friend fudge the girl I was with at the time. Are they swingers? He clearly was blindsided by this thought after we talked. More so was I because I couldn't even get a conversation out of this girl, and now all of a sudden she wants close relationship. I thought the whole thing was weird, and that it was basically her way of saying she wanted to fudge his best friend in a polite way. But IDK, personally, you shouldn't be delving into those kind of close relationship adventures so early on in a relationship. I had gave him a warning, but he refused to listen, and 1 year later she broke up with him due to not being attracted to him.